Every soldier of the cities of Sigmar proudly wear the uniform and heraldry of the city from which they hail. In this video, we'll be showing you how to paint the uniform and the heraldry from the seasoned and formidable Hammerhell Gyra. If you're new to painting, you can check out the Citadel Colour Painting Essentials videos to learn all about painting Warhammer. All the paints you'll need for this guide are on screen now. Remember that these are our suggestions and that you can paint your miniatures however you like. Also on screen now is any additional equipment we've used. This includes brushes and mediums. However, please use whatever brushes you're most comfortable with, and if you don't have mediums at home, you could use water instead. So for this video, we've got a free guild steel helm built and undercoated using grey cere. We've chosen this undercoat as it's a nice mid-tone, which we'll easily be able to layer over with whatever base coats we choose. So the first thing we're going to do is paint the shield, and for this we're going to base coat the wood using Scrag Brown. Even though this is a layer paint, we can still use it to base coat with. We might just need to apply an extra layer or so. To apply this, thin it down with some water and apply a few thin coats over the area. Don't worry about being neat at this stage, as we'll be painting all the other details anyway. The next thing we'll do is add a shade over that wood, and for this we'll be using Berserker Blood Shade. This is a really nice red tone, so it will change the overall colour of the wood, making it much warmer and add lots of depth to the recesses too. When we're applying this, we want to apply it heavily and neatly, being careful to control the pooling. If you find it pooling too much anywhere, clean off your brush and use that to soak up any excess paint. We do this because shade paints can quite easily run out of control on a miniature. Again, we don't need to worry about being neat here, just make sure you get that paint into all those recesses. Now we'll be adding a dry brush to the wood, and we do this now, again, so that we really don't have to worry about being neat, as we'll be painting all the other details later anyway. For this, we'll be using a small dry brush, and we'll be using Talon Sand. This will make our shield look really aged and worn. When we're dry brushing, we need to add a little bit of paint to a paper towel or maybe a piece of cardboard. Then we need to work off as much of that paint on the brush as possible. So for this, we wipe it onto the paper towel in circular and crisscross motions until we've just got a small amount of paint left on the bristles. Then we carefully move the brush over the raised detail. We do this in backwards and forwards and circular motions. Doing this catches all that raised detail and creates a highlight. You might want to dry brush a little bit more heavily towards the bottom of the shield to add some more age and weathering. Now we'll paint the trim, and for this we'll be using Corvus Black. This is a base paint, so we need to thin it down and apply a few thin layers. Just take care around the details we've already painted. But don't worry if you do make any mistakes, you can tidy up with the previous steps. You might find it easier to switch to a smaller brush here. We're using a small layer brush, as this gives us a little bit more control. Now we'll use Morghast Bone to paint the middle area of the shield. Again, we need to thin this down and apply a few thin layers, being careful around the details we've already painted. And once that's done, we've got all our base coats done, so we've just got a few steps left. To shade that middle area of the shield, we'll be thinning down some Seraphim Sepia with Lamia Medium. For this, we'll be using 1 part medium to 1 part Seraphim Sepia. And again, if you don't have the medium, you could use water instead. Apply this just like before, heavily and neatly, being careful to control that pooling. Doing this will just add some subtle depth and age to the area. Make sure you leave the paint fully to dry before you move on. If we try and move around wet paint, this could create unwanted texture. Now, if you'd like to add a highlight to the trim, we could use Administratum Grey for this. So we'll be using a small layer brush and we'll be applying an edge highlight. When we're doing this, we just need to make sure we've got a really stable painting position. Don't be scared to move the miniature around as much as you need, as this will help you get the best angle on those highlights. Make sure you keep a good point on your brush, and where you can, use the edge of your brush to run that along the hard lines. Doing this will achieve a quick and easy highlight. You'll also need to make sure that you've thinned your paint down a little bit. We'll need it to be thin enough so that it glides off the brush effortlessly, but not too thin so that it becomes watery. This wouldn't settle on the miniature correctly. And as always, don't worry if you make mistakes, just take some thinned down Corvus Black and use that to tidy back up if you need to. So if you'd like to add a highlight to the middle area too, we can use Screaming Skull for this. Follow the same steps as before, remembering those key points when you're edge highlighting. This area really lends itself to using the edge of the brush, so feel free to move the miniature around as much as you need to get that good angle. The final thing we're going to do on the shield is add a kind of moss effect. For this, we'll be using Elysian Green thinned down with Lamia Medium. We'll be thinning this paint down to around the same consistency as one of our shade paints. This means that it's much more subtle on the miniature and we can build up those really thin layers to increase the effect. We'll be using 3 parts Lamia Medium and 1 part Elysian Green to achieve this consistency. Then we'll be adding it to the bottom areas of the shield, and you'll see that this builds up a really subtle moss effect. We can also add it onto the cream areas too. You can add as much or as little of this as you want, but it's a really cool effect just to finish off that shield and make it look like it's really seen battle. Now we'll move on to painting the tunic, and we'll start off with a base coat of corn red. This is a really rich red which complements that wood really nicely. Again, this is a base paint, so we'll thin it down and apply a few thin layers, taking care around any details that you've already painted. We're using a small base brush here, but you might prefer to use a smaller brush like a medium or a small layer brush. Again, use whatever brush you're most comfortable with. Now we'll add a shade all over the tunic, and we'll be using Nuln Oil for this. We can take this straight from the pot and apply it all over, just like we did with the other shades. So we'll apply it heavily and neatly and make sure to control that pooling. Nuln Oil is quite subtle, so you'll see that this has a really nice effect on our miniature. When you're applying shades over large areas like this, make sure you work in small sections. This avoids the paint drying out too quickly, which could create an inconsistent finish. The final thing we'll do for the tunic is add an edge highlight of Wazdaka Red. When we're doing this, we'll treat it just like our other edge highlights. Make sure you've got that stable painting position and that you really take your time picking out all those raised edges. Make sure your paint's nice and thin, as this will help it be more subtle and it will help the paint glide better off the brush. Don't worry if you make any mistakes, just thin down some corn red and use that to tidy back up. And again, wherever you can, use the edge of that brush, as this will give us a really quick and easy highlight, which is great if you've got loads of these miniatures to paint. And there we are, the wood and tunic of our miniature are finished and looking great. You can use the techniques shown to paint any Hammerhal Gyra miniatures in your Cities of Sigmar collection. We've applied a transfer to the shield just to finish it off, and if you'd like to learn more about using transfers, you can check out our video all about it. For more tutorials, tips and tricks, you can head to your local Warhammer store where our amazing staff will be more than happy to help. Or head on over to citadelcolour.com. Well, we hope you've enjoyed the video and we'll see you next time. Bye!